I think it's been well established at this point that non-human intelligence is not only here, but it's active on and around our planet.
Non-human origin, technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will.
Intelligently controlled, solid objects invading restricted military airspace, sometimes flying in formation.
The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had. You're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave, and there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Multiple credible reports indicate these objects have rendered segments of our nuclear deterrent inoperable. In other recent cases, they're jamming radars on fighter aircraft. We also have multiple cases of near mid-air collisions and other cases involving serious injuries to military and civilian personnel.
And the question remains, what are they doing? I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the conversation about technology and disclosure that we overlook this much more interesting and important question. Some people claim that because these beings are more advanced than we are, they are neutral or benevolent. How could you possibly know what an unknown number of non-human intelligences are up to? And that's why I wanted to sit down with Matt Hurley. He is the founder of the website badaliens.info. Now, what is badaliens.info? Great question. I'm glad you asked. It's a website that gathers together some of the research that's been done on the darker side of the phenomenon. And it does get dark.
Have human beings been hurt or killed by a non-human intelligence?
I was briefed by a few individuals on the program that there were malevolent events like that.
Complex narratives have been taken by alien beings into UFOs on beams of light.
They do all kinds of experiments. They give them shots, they poke them, they cut them.
What about the insertion of wires and tubes into abductees in the chest, in the kidneys, the ovaries, the wrists, the knees, and the feet?
Well, he says the mutilations have not gone from animals to humans yet. You agree with that?
There have been some humans. It's a very, very sensitive subject. I'm going to steer away from that.
It's important information. It's hard to find on the internet. You can find it, but you have to know how to look for it and where to look for it. And it really rounds out the conversation about what is going on here. You can't just look at positive experiences and say that's all there is to know here and then move on with your day. We have to look at everything and we have to take it all on board and we have to talk about it. And that's why I wanted to sit down with Matt. We had a great conversation. We talked about the motivation behind the website, the inspiration behind it, what he thinks is going on, and a whole lot more. I know you're gonna like it. Don't forget to like and share this video. And hey, if you're not already a subscriber, consider subscribing. It doesn't cost anything. It only takes a second, and it really helps out the channel. Thanks for watching. Now enjoy the interview. For people who aren't familiar with badaliens.info, tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to create this site, and what it's all about.
So about 3 years ago, I read some channeled material, which is called The Allies of Humanity, which talks about the alien presence on Earth, and it goes into detail on some of the activities that these aliens are carrying out, such as abductions, people going missing, animals being mutilated, etc., etc. So after reading it, I thought, I want to create a website. I want to take a lot of the mystery and the BS away from the subject and make it very black and white and very clear and very lucid. So I thought the way to structure the website would be to sort of categorize the different activities that the aliens are doing on a different subpage. So there'll be a page on abductions, a page on animal mutilations. I definitely wanted to cover human mutilations because it's not widely talked about. A subpage on missing people, etc., etc. So I wanted this structure nice and clear, nice and lucid. No BS to it. Try and keep it simple. Have some good solid cases there. So that was the basic structure. And then when it came to the conclusion, what caught my eye was a statement that Linda Moulton Howe often talks about on her channel, whereby a retired defense intelligence agent said there were several competing groups of aliens on Earth and who all want a piece of the pie, if you like. They all want to control the Earth and its resources. And I thought, that matches exactly what the Allies of Humanity is saying. So I sort of weaved into my conclusion this quote from Linda Moulton Howe, and also then the Atlas of Humanity material, because if you're presenting evidence of what ETs are doing, it's kind of nice if you can have a conclusion where you're giving potentially the reader more detailed information on why they're doing it and where they're coming from, which I think the Atlas of Humanity material does address a lot of those points in a very clear, lucid manner. And also, sort of very recently, I came across the work of psychic Pat Price and how he was able to do a lot of remote views over a period of years. He came to the conclusion again that there are several competing alien groups on Earth. So there's several sets of corroboration there in the conclusion. So I think it has a nice flow to it, and it's corroborative information from different sources. We're all looking for corroboration when we're researching. So that was basically how the website came across and how I structured it.
Let's take the channeling thing head on, because that's where most people seem to get off the bus. And I think a lot of people have trouble with this. For those people who don't know, when we say channeled material, what are we talking about? Where is it being channeled from? Who's doing the channeling? And why should we accept this information above what we can see with our own eyes?
Well, typically with the channeler, they go into like an altered state of consciousness, and normally an entity talks through them. I think in some cases it could be the person's own fantasy part of their mind that's doing it. But in other cases, I think there may be some external entity that's doing it. Of course, whether the entity is what it's saying it is, that's another question. But in terms of the Atlas of Humanity, the channeler in question was Marshall V. and Summers. And he went into this altered state of consciousness. And on 4 distinct periods over several decades, he's channeled 4 volumes of information from this group. Now, this group allegedly are a group of friendly aliens. They're not on Earth. They're some distance away. They represent different star systems in our galaxy. And what they're doing is they're spying on the alien presence on Earth and revealing through Marshall what's actually going on. Because if we don't have information like that, where else are we going to get the information from? The government isn't telling us. The channeled world is a very confused world. There's a lot of channelers out there, and there are a lot of conflicting narratives. So, it's a case of which horse do you back? I back the Atlas of Humanity horse, because compared to a lot of other channelers, it's addressing a lot of the dark, negative stuff that these aliens are carrying out, a lot of their activities that they're carrying out. Whereas you tend to find generally with a lot of other channelers, they have this sort of love and light narrative, and it appeals to those with sort of rose-tinted spectacles. What sets the Atlas of Humanity material apart is it's very dark, quite gothic, and it isn't like your typical sort of channel material. So when you get something that's a bit of an outlier, you tend to think, that's catching my eye. Let's give it a proper read. And when I read the whole 4 volumes, that I was so enamored by it. That's what inspired me to create my website, and I wanted to back up what was resonating with me by actual, nuts and bolts cases on my website.
I used to have a lot more difficulty with channeled material years ago, and it was very hard for me to accept that as legitimate information. I had a personal experience where I saw something that was very personal to me that didn't happen. It happened in the mental environment. It happened when I was on an ayahuasca ceremony. So I was pretty far deep into that. And I couldn't understand these visions at the time. I had very, very clear visions of very specific things. And I left that experience confused. I actually went into it looking for answers, and I left more confused than I was when I came in. And years later, a number of years later, the events that I saw in my vision happened. And not only happened, but some people that I saw in that vision came into my life. And and it was a very weird moment, because it was like a delayed reaction that happened years after this event. And I remember explaining it to my wife, and I can't explain to you what I saw. It makes no sense. This is what I saw. It just makes no sense until years later when it did. And so for me, it opened the door for that to be a reality. And it expanded sort of my bubble of reality a little bit beyond where I was at previously. And so when I see, the first time we spoke and we talked about this, it was easier for me to take on board, but some of the viewers had questions and they just were like, I don't know. And I recently interviewed, as you know, Marshall's son, Reed Summers, which I'll link to in this video. From what we can gather, it does appear that there's something going on here on the ground, right? We have UFOs. They're coming in and out of the atmosphere. They're going in and out of the ocean. They're not telling us what they're doing. They're obviously not helping us in any clear, visible way. They could have sent a signal to SETI. We've been listening for decades. They could have just sent a radio signal if they really wanted to let us know. So there's a clandestine nature to what's going on. And it seems like your website grounds itself in that world of what is actually happening. What evidence do we have to support that? And so it jives a lot.
I think, as Reed said, if you've got channel information, is it observable? Is what you're reading, can you observe it in reality, in nature? Yes, I can observe abduction accounts. I can look at photos of animal mutilations. I can watch David Paulides' YouTube channel and read about people that disappear in strange circumstances. So if you've got that observable factor with channel information, then that's good evidence. Makes it a bit more compelling than purely speculative. And it doesn't get into detail about we're from this star system and we wear these coloured outfits and this is what we eat for dinner. There's none of that. It's just purely what these aliens on Earth are doing. They don't reveal much about themselves, which again impresses me, because a lot of material goes into all that minutiae. And
what are the allies of humanity basically trying to tell us about what's going on?
There are several groups of aliens on Earth. They're physical beings. They're not time travelers. They're not multidimensional. They're from our galaxy. And basically, they want the resources on Earth, biological resources, metals, minerals, flora, fauna, whatever they need for their own needs. What they say, what Marshall says is when societies become very technological, they tend to eat up their own resources. So they then need to go and look elsewhere for resources. And they've been observing our planet for probably thousands of years. And they've waited to a point in time when we're all interconnected via the internet. We've reached a certain stage in technology and development. So these aliens can come in. They can give their trinkets from space to certain people in the US government as a way of leverage. We'll give you some trinkets from space if you let us do X, Y, Z, maybe abductions, who knows. Because everyone's interconnected, it's easier for aliens to spread propaganda around the world and influence human thought and behavior. So there's a time aspect to this also as well. We have the atomic weapons detonations from the late 40s onwards. So again, if you want to take over a planet, you want it to be kept in good condition. You don't want the natives destroying it. So there's that aspect as well. So several groups of aliens that want this planet for themselves. One of the activities they're doing, they're creating hybrids between themselves and us. So they'll create a being that looks like us, but is psychically linked to them. They will be then inserted in positions of power and influence. And through that way, then you then, in longer term, are able to control the planet and its populace.
One argument against this would be that they don't seem to be doing any damage overtly. And if they really wanted to do anything negative, they would have done it by now. In fact, it does appear that they turn off our nuclear weapons and they seem to be giving us the message that they're here for peaceful reasons, at least some of them anyway. How do you respond to that?
The nuclear thing, I think there's different ways of looking at it. You could say, well, that they want us to be peaceful and the aliens themselves are peaceful. Please switch off your nukes, get rid of them. Or you could say it's a display of nature, a display of power. We've got the ability to turn off your nuclear weapons at will.
But our military is encountering intelligently controlled, solid objects invading restricted military airspace, sometimes flying in formation. In many cases, they're emitting radiation in the 1 to 3 and 8 to 12 gigahertz range. Multiple credible reports indicate these objects have rendered segments of our nuclear deterrent inoperable. In other recent cases, they're jamming radars on fighter aircraft. We also have multiple cases of near-midair collisions and other cases involving serious injuries to military and civilian personnel.
You look at all the other nefarious acts that they're carrying out. I don't see that as an outlier demonstrating that they're of peaceful intentions. But I can see how some people would view it like that.
Do you get any pushback from people when you talk about this? Does anybody offer a counterpoint to that?
I sometimes get in debates on Reddit, etc., but I tend not to post too much these days. It gets a bit stressful. I just tend to let people look at my website, and if they like what they see, great. If they disagree, well, at least they've had a look at the evidence. I'm aware there's people out there that won't like what I do, and there'll be people that do like what I do. But I don't really get that much pushback, so I don't really try and enter into too many debates with people. The few emails I get tend to be positive. I don't get much negative emails.
It's interesting that ufology is so focused right now on the UAP aspect of it, because it seems like that's almost within reach. We could almost get our hands on one of these craft. We kind of know where they are. At least some of the whistleblowers claim to know where they are, and that's come forward. And now there's congressional legislation on the matter, and there seems to be a lot of government movement on the physical ships and the technology that appear to be somewhere. But back 20, 30 years ago, I remember the conversation being very focused on the abduction phenomenon and experiencers and what was happening with them on an individual basis.
They're taken up into a saucer, usually lasts about an hour.
They're oftentimes taken at night when they're alone. They don't have to be asleep. It's not sleep paralysis, has nothing to do with it, anything that has to do with sleep. But that's when they'll be missed the least.
Complex narratives have been taken by alien beings into UFOs on beams of light.
They do all kinds of experiments. They give them shots, they poke them, they cut them.
What about the insertion of wires and tubes into abductees in the chest, in the kidneys, the ovaries, the wrists, the knees, and the feet, as well as the taking of human body fluids and the injection of unknown substances into the body? What about the deliberate pain experiments meant to produce levels of pain in the abductees, apparently for the measurement, study, or pleasure of the aliens who are observing them?
Only after several months of some psychological problems do they end up going to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist, on trying to find out what the problem is, in the use of hypnosis, finds out that this person has been abducted.
In the past 4 years, I've worked now with approximately 90 people who've had these experiences, and they tell a very similar story.
And you don't think these were wild dreams,
not
hallucinations?
Not at all. These are very solid people, healthy, mentally healthy people. This is not the way dreams behave. This is not the way mental illness behaves. This is not the way fantasy behaves.
People see other people being abducted and are not abducted themselves. People are abducted in groups and can confirm each other's abductions. People can sometimes, and this happens, meet other abductees at random, run into them on the street, and each one recognizes each other from being together on an abduction event. It's rare, but it does happen. And so there's a physicality to this. It's not a mentality.
Some kind of real experience is occurring to these people, but if this is a real experience, that is some kind of entities, beings, intelligences are entering our world and affecting hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people according to polls, then this is something really worth looking at. So that's what I've been trying to do, is get people at least look at it.
Why are they doing this? I can boil it down to 2 words, and it's a guess. Planetary acquisition.
The 1990s, I think, was the golden age for abduction researchers, because you had Bud Hopkins, Carla Turner, David Jacobs. Implants were being removed and they were being filmed on programs like Sightings on American TV. And, you know, Jacobs has retired, Carla Turner passed away, Hopkins has retired. I don't know if there's enough people coming through that have the same passion as those abduction researchers did. But also, I think people like Jacobs drill down into it so much. I don't know now if we can extrapolate much more about what's going on from the data than what he did. Because he was talking about hybrids and how they were being introduced to the mothers, etc., etc. I don't think the subject's progressed. The abduction side of it has progressed that much since, really. And the implant removals as well. I don't know if they're still going on or whether that they hit a sort of a standstill after Roger Lear died in about 2011, I think. Because implants is tangible physical evidence. And if no one else is removing those, I think that's a shame, really. If scientists should be analysing those and working out what's going on, what's their use, what functions do they perform,
I think we can do a screen share in a minute, and I'll pull up some on the website, and we could take a look at them. But I always find it really interesting that how little the abduction phenomena is discussed these days. And it seems for people who are new to this conversation, and maybe some people who are younger and don't remember what happened back in the 90s and late 80s, how much of a big deal this was. A huge deal. I mean, this was on television all the time. It was on Oprah. John Mack was at Harvard. They almost threw John Mack out of Harvard for talking about it.
All the famous chat shows had a abduction episode, pretty much, back in the day. Montel, as you say, Oprah Winfrey, etc. Yeah, they all had them on. Brave people as well, because obviously they face a lot of flack and pushback from skeptical audience, people being laughed at. So credit for them to going on TV.
Exactly. It was a weird time because you would see people who were very obviously traumatized, clearly suffering from some type of PTSD from their experience. And then you have John Mack, one of the, if not the preeminent expert in the world at the time on this, going on television saying this appears to be a very real phenomenon. There's nothing in the history or the mental assessment I can do of these people that shows me that they're lying or that they are making this up and it's just coming out of nowhere. Clearly, they believe this really happened to them, and they're reacting that way. And like you said, there was also physical implants and physical scars and physical marks on people. And as David Jacobs talked about, that people would be abducted and they'd be missing for a period of time. Their family couldn't find them. Neighbors didn't know where they were, and then they would reappear. They had no memory of what happened, and then suddenly it would come back later, and they'd have to pull it through in regression, for hypnotic regression.
As you say, it seems to have kind of gone out of fashion a bit now, and people are more focused on the craft and where are the craft and the bodies, which is great. We need to look at that, but maybe abductions aren't quite as prominent as they were, the research.
I think it's a weird breakdown in the conversation because if you're willing to accept that there are beings and there are craft and the craft are here, someone's making those craft are being piloted by something. There's an intelligence involved. That intelligence is active here, clearly, because the craft are here. They're coming and going. And so what are they doing? No one's asking that question.
It's not a massive leap of faith to think if they're coming here, then they might take people here and there to analyse or whatever. Yeah, it's not a massive leap of faith. And then if you go into animal mutilations, if they're doing it to animals, maybe they do it to humans as well. Again, for me, it's not a massive leap of faith. But yeah,
it's not a massive leap. No, not at all. I am intrigued by it, and I wish more people were studying it because I'd like to learn more about it. But all of the books that are out on the issue, I've pretty much read, and it's terrifying. If you read Bud Hopkins and John Mack, for those who don't know, but Bud Hopkins was an artist in New York who initially began to investigate this and got John Mack involved. So Bud Hopkins and John Mack sort of came together, and that's how John Mack got roped into it. And David Jacobs and Carla Turner were also looking at it from different perspectives. Carla herself was an experiencer or an abductee, and she was famously very almost skeptical about what it could be. I remember her talking a lot about she never really says it's one thing or another exactly. It's just weird, and we should be looking at it.
Yeah. I was a little story about Professor Mack. I was his chauffeur when he came to the UK in '95, did a conference in Wales.
Were you really?
I knew the organiser, yeah, so I had to pick him up from the station, take him to his hotel and take him to the conference. That's my little John Mack claim to fame. But strangely, I never had a photo taken with him. I should have done. Back in 1995, yeah. He was asking me about Cardiff. Tell me about Cardiff. Tell me about the industry. And I don't really know because I'm from Newport. But yeah,
was this when he passed away because he died in London, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was about 12 years later. I think that was 2007, 2010. I think something like that. This is back in 1995.
Very strange case too, because he walked into the street, didn't realize that the traffic was coming from the wrong direction, and so he just got hit by a drunk driver. And people think it was a big conspiracy that he was killed. But it turned out it was actually a drunk driver.
Yeah,
right?
drunk driver, yeah.
It was unbelievable. And then after that, David Jacobs was pretty much the only one left looking at it for a while, and then he kind of got out of it too.
Yeah, but like I say, who's coming forward now with the same passion and ability that they had, you know? I don't know. Everyone just focused on disclosure.
Well, I think disclosure, and we talked a little bit before we started the show about the Soul Foundation and how they had a panel of speakers who, and out of that panel of very qualified individuals, no one was really discussing what the possible agenda might be. Yeah. And I do think that's an interesting break in the conversation. It seems like people are willing to walk right up to that line and not cross it yet.
I think the thing is with foundation like the Soul Foundation, that the theologian will talk about theology, the physicist will talk about physics. Who is going to talk about agenda? I don't know if there's an academic background that would make you suitable for that. Maybe it's a little bit more speculative and joining the dots together. So maybe academics like just to stay in their sort of safety zone and just talk about the phenomenon from their own specific. So maybe agenda's a bit of an odd box for an academic to talk about, if you get what I mean, you know? You had like Pasulka talking about theology and, you know, the science guys talking about science and the consciousness guys talking about consciousness, putting all the dots together in the agenda. I suppose you're getting out of your safety net a bit there, aren't you, when you're getting into the realms of speculation? But I'm not an academic, so I'm free to do that, and I'm comfortable talking about it. But maybe, you know, if you're of the academic world, maybe they're a little bit more stricter in what they're going to say publicly. Maybe behind the scenes, they might have formulated some ideas about the phenomenon and, you know, $64,000 questions. But on a public academic platform, maybe they're a little bit more cagey and will just stay within their lane.
I think ufology is in a weird moment right now where we're trying to establish some facts that we can actually build on and get a foundation in place that's based on real evidence. And everyone's so excited about the UFO disclosure issue because that appears to be the solid nuts and bolts information we need to start to expand it out from there. But to get legitimacy is sort of the first step, and then you can kind of go the next level from there. I'm really excited to see what the Soul Foundation is doing because it's desperately needed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not knocking it with my statement earlier. I mean, I welcome the academic world looking at the phenomenon, but it was just interesting. Out of the 15 speakers, there was no one who was really drilling down and coming up with the agenda. But maybe in a future set of presentations, maybe they'll look more into that. Maybe this is just like an initial stage one, if you like. But maybe
the fighter pilots have mentioned, like Ryan Graves and David Fravor have mentioned it, and they've said things like it's definitely a concern if you have some technology that can do what this technology can do. That's terrifying from a military perspective. When I talked to Daniel Sheehan, he said that there was a case where they were able to turn off some of our battleships at an aircraft carrier. They could just switch them off.
I
and
tell
they're
you
just dead in the water.
I tell you what I find interesting, I've noticed lately, is you've got people like Gary Nolan, Lou Elizondo. They're talking about these alien experiences they may have had in their past, in their childhood. It makes you wonder how many of the key players are sort of coming from a potential abduction background themselves. And, you know, is the phenomenon pulling the strings in the way they talk, or has their abduction account inspired them to go down that avenue? But there seems to be a sort of correlation with it. There's like a disproportionate amount of people in the public arena, well-known names, that have this, well, yeah, I did have missing time, or I did have some beings in the bedroom. You know, it's interesting.
I had a conversation just this last week. The interview just went up today with one of the moderators at UFOB on Reddit. I
saw most of that, yeah.
And he talked about, he kind of colored outside the lines a little bit on his experience, and then he didn't really want to go too much further into it because it was a little scary for him. And we talked about the Gary Nolan story, and I actually clipped that in that video. And what Gary describes is crazy. And he just talks about it like it's just a normal day and nothing to see here, and he just moves on. And I think it's even weirder because if you step back and you look at who Gary Nolan is, look at his career. He's He's got dozens of patents. He's a super millionaire a dozen times over. He has started and sold a number of companies. He's a certified genius, a Nobel Prize nominee. And he's telling you with a straight face, as a child and throughout his life, he has had experiences with beings literally showing up in his room as a kid and looking in his window in his bedroom, and his brother as well had these experiences, and he talks about it openly. And then he goes, well, I don't know. He just goes on. I'm like, wait, but look at who you are. Don't you think, is it possible that they're enhancing people to some degree and giving them abilities that are just not common in the population to make somebody into a genius at that level?
Or they may have good DNA anyway, and the aliens want that DNA for their hybrid program. So maybe Gary was the full package initially, and they want it, we'll have some of that. Need some high IQ.
Yeah.
What might be the other way around? But what interests me is people like Gary Nolan, if they are abductees, are they able to stand back and look at the phenomenon and objectively and say, yeah, it points towards it being nefarious, or are they kind of under some sort of subliminal thought form, and they'll tend to view it as positive? So if Lou Elizondo, for example, as well as an abductee, what is their actual specific viewpoint on the phenomenon? If they're abductees themselves, are they going to embrace it? Yeah, it was meant to be, they come in peace. Or are they able to stand back and say, I don't think they're here for our benefit,
Lou seems to be a little bit more sober in his analysis, and he is, at least in the descriptions that I've seen of what he thinks is going on, he seems to be kind of neutral about it.
He goes a bit
we need to be
at times, yeah.
We need to be cautious because of what we're talking about here. I mean, let's take a second on that. The baseline assumption from most people appears to be they're not here to harm us because they haven't done it already. And so, therefore, whatever the alien presence may be, it's positive. But it's certainly not negative. It's either neutral or positive. And there are many people, I would say probably the majority of the people I've talked to, seem to feel that it's just positive. It couldn't possibly be negative. And then when you push them on that, they have nowhere, there's nothing behind that. They're like, well, it is. It has to be, because they haven't done anything yet. And so I wonder, where are the other people who are like you and myself who are saying, hold on, let's just take a second here. Assuming this is all happening the way that the whistleblowers are describing, the way the witnesses are describing, the way experiencers are describing, what they're describing is science fiction level technology coming and going at will, as they please, anywhere, anytime, all over the world, every single day. This is according to fighter pilots like Ryan Graves has said this. We saw them every day, every single day. When we were doing training exercises, they're out there. Pilots see them all the time. A cube inside of a sphere with the corners touching the edges, or the bizarre gimbal video and the tic tac. Some of it is likely our own technology that we've developed in secret, I think, but some of it is definitely not. And so if they're coming and going, they're doing something. There must be an agenda. Richard Dolan talks about this a lot. There's an infrastructure.
Richard's quite good on that one, yeah.
He actually did a recent interview on his show, and it was he touched on this a little bit. He got into the possible agenda. That's one of the things about Richard that I like a lot. He's not afraid to speculate on what they might actually be doing here. But it seems like there's two camps, and it's very clearly divided. And one group is saying, let's be cautious, and the other group is saying there's no reason to worry. We should be worried about us.
I think one of the reasons is, I think, because the aliens haven't had an overt sci-fi war with us, people think, well, there's nothing going on. Whereas because it's being very clandestine, that's why the aliens will be able to get away with it, and why the vast majority of the public, or those interested in the subject, are coming up with this line, well, they haven't done anything negative. Well, they have, but it's isolated, it's clandestine. It's not sort of overt, 60,000 people at a football match haven't suddenly vanished. It's not as macro as that, is it? It's more micro what they're doing. And I think as well, you've got things like human mutilations, which I think are taking place, and that is strong ammunition, which is showing that they're nefarious. And because that aspect isn't widely talked about in the subject for many decades since it first became noticed, that has really helped, I don't think, to sort of furnish the idea in people's minds that they are doing dangerous, horrible things to people.
In your
We're
own
beyond abductions, then, aren't we?
We go, yeah, it goes way beyond abductions. At a certain point, you have various hypotheses as to what could be going on. Some people say we're in a zoo, we're in some kind of like sequestered off in this area of space, and other people say that they already were here before us. It's a precursor civilization that reached a certain level, left, and they come back and go as they please. And it's almost impossible to know. But if you look at what people are saying and you look at the evidence that's being presented and you start to try and weave it together, it doesn't look good. I'm not saying I can fill in all the gaps. And a lot of this is speculation, but it certainly does appear that there's something strange in the neighborhood.
Another thing people say is, well, there's good and bad coming here. Well, my question is, how are you going to tell friend from foe? Do aliens lie? You know, how you, these sort of think tanks like Sol and the Paradigm Institute, this is something at some point they're going to have to address. When aliens, if they do become overt, how are we, as the natives of this planet, going to be able to determine friend from foe? You know, I don't know how they're going to approach that problem. That is something further down the track I think we'll have to deal with. Discernment. Okay, they exist. Are they going to lie to us? Are they telling us the truth? We created you. Did you? What's your evidence?
How do we know? I think that's my biggest problem with the people who say there's no reason to worry. It's all good, right? Because you go, well, how could you possibly know that? We don't know how many different types of beings there are. We don't know what their motivations are, what their dispositions are, and they're not human. They're not like us. They don't think the way we do. Let's assume for a second they have a lifespan that's unlimited, or maybe they live 1,000 years, and a 40 or 50 year stretch in human terms is nothing to them. It's like an afternoon. So their plans might be longer term. There may be a different objective in mind, and we just have no way to discern that from what we can see. We just don't have enough information to work with. But the people who are on the Love and Light Brigade are very much committed to that line of thinking, and I find that a little problematic.
It's almost a lazy way of thinking. You don't have to think about anything. Just relax, kick back. Don't worry. The aliens are fine. You know what I mean? It takes effort, takes a bit of courage, takes a bit of discernment to sort of look at alternative angles to the Love and Light, I think, you know. But that's just naturally what I sort of lean towards, you know, for me personally. That's on my journey, my UFO journey. I'm leaning towards this dark, nefarious aspect. And here I am talking about it on podcasts, you know. It's I'm just.
What do you think about the fact that
talk about it?
What do you think about the fact that you're talking about it on podcasts now, and that people like myself are interested in hearing that perspective?
Well, one thing leads to another, doesn't it? I mean, you know, someone sends me a link to a website. I read about the others of humanity. I create the website, and then I do podcasts. So it's sort of one thing leading to another. You know, that's one of the mysteries and magics of life. How something today can have an effect on you tomorrow that you never planned or predicted. All of this is totally unplanned. You know, as maybe it is for you with your podcast. It wasn't something you might have thought of doing 5 years ago. But
I was surprised to see it take off. I was explaining it to someone the other day who asked me some questions about the show, and I said, I found myself with a lot of time on my hands during the COVID lockdowns. I found that this story fascinating. It's fascinated me for my entire life, ever since I was a kid. I grew up watching Star Wars and Star Trek when I was a kid. Of course, if you tell me there are aliens coming here, I'm in all the way. And so I started to, just for fun, and then because I had nothing else to do, I put together some content that I thought was just interesting to me, and I put it out there. And my very first post got 25,000 views. It wasn't on YouTube; it was on a different platform, but it immediately took off. And I thought, oh man, I gotta follow this up with something. So I put another post out and it took off, and I put another post out and it took off. And then I started to do these longer form videos, and they didn't take off as much. They are going a little better than they used to be.
Yeah. When I was a kid, you'd get these books A to Z of the paranormal. I would always go straight to the UFO. I'd bypass everything else, the crystals, the ghosts. I'd always go straight to the UFO. So that interest has always been with me from childhood. So yeah, here I am.
It just popped into my mind that one of the first Soul Foundation videos I watched was Christopher Mellon's presentation, which you should probably start with that one. He gives a great talk that does actually address the potential threat posed by contact. And he talks about, not strictly in military terms, but he talks about contact between civilizations in our own world historically not working out very well for the less advanced civilization.
Yeah.
The culture gets subsumed by this other more advanced society, and it causes just a huge, enormous disruption. And if I had to guess what our government would be concerned about, it would probably be something along those lines.
One of the problems with the threat narrative, of course, a lot of people say, well, you just want to give more money to the American military establishment. Well, you can't really win, can you? You've got this evidence we saw it being a threat, and then people say, well, you're just saying it's a threat because you want to give more money to the American DOD. Well, if there is
a complicated relationship with that.
Results.
I have a complicated relationship with that idea because on the one hand, I'm not a fan of the military industrial complex. I'm not a fan of war. I'm not a fan of any of this stuff. I think there are so many more constructive things we should be doing with our resources than this. But I also think that it's important to figure out how this stuff works, because if we're going to have to deal with these things, it's going to be key to how we conduct ourselves. If we don't have technology that can approach what they have, then it's already over. It's over.
You would think advanced civilizations in the universe would have technology to stop nefarious outsiders coming in. Obviously, we're not at that stage yet, but maybe behind the scenes, the American government is working on technology that can then bring these craft down. There's lots of rumors of that. But then you'd think, if these aliens are monitoring our technological progress, would they allow development in areas which is ultimately technology to bring those craft down? So I don't know how it's playing out behind the scenes, but the mind boggles a bit on that one.
It's a tough one to wrap your head around, but it makes sense to me that we would want to figure it out and get our mind around that technology to some extent. So at least we can figure out how to better our own society. I think that's my problem with the whole issue, is that the technology to take us from where we're at to essentially a Star Trek world where there's no hunger, no disease, no war. We have it. It's already there. And a lot of it is stuff that we've already developed internally on our own anyway. We're just not deploying it very well, and our priorities are all screwed up. But there's also seemingly magic technology that, anti-gravity technology, unlimited zero-point energy technology, advanced metamaterials that can do all kinds of different things, superconductors that work at room temperature. So it's plausible that we could be living in a world that could be 500 years more advanced than the one we're in today. We're just holding back a lot of this to make some money off of it. I think that's my big problem with the whole issue.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think we need sovereignty over our own planet. I think, we can't have aliens coming in, running amok, taking people against their will, etc. People need to feel secure. If you're going to go for a walk in a national park, you need to feel secure. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to be thinking about nefarious intruders coming in, whisking people away. So yeah, that does need to be addressed at some point in the future. But
I interviewed.
Everyone's got to come clean with what they know.
I interviewed a while back Jim Garrison from the New Paradigm Institute and Ubiquity University, and he had a great statement. I don't see exactly eye to eye with Jim on everything, but we're in alignment on a lot of things. And one of the things that he said that stuck with me was what the people in charge of the program, whoever they may be, MJ-12, whatever you want to call them, what they're really concerned about is that once this becomes widely accepted, and I think the subject of ufology is going mainstream right now. We're watching that happen. This is one of the reasons why my channel is doing as well as it is, and other people are taking off as well. This conversation is deeply desired by many people. They want to talk about it. They've had their own experiences. They understand that there's something going on, and now they want to work it out between us. And we need everybody on deck. You need artists. You need engineers. You need scientists. You need brilliant minds. You need regular people. Everybody to get involved in the conversation so that we can figure it out. And one of the things that Jim Garrison said was, what they're worried about is that once this becomes widely accepted and fully internalized, it's going to mean that human beings have one single origin story. And we really won't be able to look at our individual nationalities and political affiliations the same way anymore. It's just not going to work in a world where we realize that there's life everywhere and we're just one planet. And that sovereignty concept that's the big destabilizer, at least within our own politics.
I think you can turn a negative into a positive and say, well, if there are negative aliens coming here, this is the one thing that could potentially unite humanity, and people can forget about religious differences and creed and colour, etc., etc. We can all unite against a common adversary. So we could potentially be turning a negative situation into a positive one for humanity.
That was actually the crux of Chris Mellon's presentation at the end. And it's absolutely worth watching the entire thing. But he basically says the comparison that he makes is to the Soviet Union and the United States during the Sputnik era, and how terrifying it was to the US that the Russians had put something in orbit, and how that stimulated and shocked us into this era of development and technological advancement around the space race. And he suggests that that's what's needed now as we stand kind of on the precipice of disaster with climate change and everything else that's going on in the world. It certainly appears that we're teetering on the edge of the abyss, that a shock to the system, something this big, it would reboot people. Exactly. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I totally agree. And another area as well, I think we haven't really discussed is parapsychology and what powers of the mind have we got that we're not using. We talk about the UFO cover-up and how a lot of scientists are skeptical of it. I think the same thing's happened in parallel with the world of parapsychology, and a lot of scientists are skeptical of psychic abilities, remote viewing, etc. But I think if more brilliant minds turn their attention to the world of parapsychology, as well as the subject of ufology, that also might help humanity long term, because it might release untapped potential that we've got within ourselves. We might be able to work out which strands of DNA are behind a lot of psychic abilities that people have, or some people have, if there's a biological component to it. So parapsychology is another area I think is important that people to look at.
You think this is all tied together as part of the same
well, the
phenomenon?
visitors that come here seem to exhibit psychic abilities, so that's a pointer to the fact that maybe we may have them as well, or some people seem to. So, let's put our attention on that. Get all the scientists that are currently skeptical of psychic abilities in humans to take a fresh look at it, and let's see what can be analysed in the lab and what results we can obtain. I'm sure we'd find a lot more cases, and we'd make a lot more developments within the field of psychic abilities if more brilliant minds in the world turn their attention to it.
Have you yourself had an experience that sort of expanded or shook up your worldview in the past?
In childhood, I tell this story occasionally. The teacher in school asked us to draw a picture of God. There's about 30 of us in the class, and everyone drew an old man with a beard, and I just drew a flame because I thought God wasn't an anthropic being. I didn't use that terminology then, but I just felt God wasn't human. I thought it was like an energy source, which is what you tend to read about in metaphysical literature. So that that was a moment in my life where I was thinking a bit differently to other people, and it's always stood with me. But in terms of paranormal phenomena, I didn't really experience anything until I got into UFOs when I was about 19. I started reading books regularly. I started getting what you'd call poltergeist type phenomena occurring. I've had it about 3 different locations, on and off, the last 20 years. But
was there one particular experience that stood out from the others, or something that really stuck with you?
I had a row once with my stepdaughter, and my bag dematerialized from behind me. which had my spare car keys in, which was quite annoying. I haven't told many people that one, but this is a big backpack. I'd come home from work. I had a spare car keys in it. I had a row with my stepdaughter, and then about an hour, like, where's my bag? It just vanished. I had other items disappear. Some things reappear in the house, but there's often connection between poltergeist phenomena and mental health and that sort of thing, being vexed. So that might have been a trigger there. I tend to form the opinion with things like poltergeist phenomena, it's the individual doing it, not necessarily some sort of separate entity, or it could be both. But most of my paranormal experiences have been in that sort of realm of things moving or things disappearing.
Have you ever followed the work of Rupert Sheldrake? Are you familiar with him?
I've read one of his books years ago, but I haven't read his stuff for a long time, to be honest with you. He wrote that book. He had a very distinctive title, but I can't remember the name of it now.
He talks about morphogenic fields and how essentially the phenomena that we see are testable, and they basically have been able to recreate this in the lab where they do an experiment. They basically have someone sit blindfolded in a chair, and they can tell when other people are looking at them from behind.
Yeah.
Or they do a game, it's called the telephone game, where they sit in front of a phone, and there are a number of people that could call them on that phone, and it's prearranged, and someone will call them, and they're supposed to guess who that person is. And statistically, they significantly are able to predict who's going to call before the call happens, especially if it's someone that they're very close to. And I don't know if it was you or who it was that I spoke with, but somebody was telling me, it might have been Steve Mera. Maybe it was you. I think it was our last interview about the connection between heightened emotional states. And
that was Steve. Yeah, Steve talked about that, yeah.
Where people get completely fired up about something, and then suddenly like a book will fly off the shelf and or something bizarre will happen.
What's interesting, a lot of people can be very vexed and nothing happens. So maybe there's some component about that individual. We're going back to the DNA, their biological makeup, that makes them predisposed to doing that sort of thing. I mean, there's the idea of memory hauntings as well, where an event from the past will repeat itself. Maybe some strong mental imprint took place at the time, and under conditions we don't know about, it kind of replays itself. So a lot of it's to do, again, with the mental environment and how people maybe subconsciously create strong mental thought forms, and within a solid 3D world, it can affect the environment around them. You don't tend to get poltergeist phenomena outdoors. It tends to be in rooms, in buildings where you've got solid walls. So maybe the person's mental vibes, are affecting that immediate environment. We're going off a tangent now from UFOs, aren't we?
well, it's all that's the thing.
Connected.
It is all weirdly connected, and I think that's the point, right? I mean, people come into this from they see a thing on the news about David Grush or UFOs and the CIA or whatever it may be, and that brings them into the conversation. And suddenly, it's like walking into a room and everybody's talking about psychic phenomenon and poltergeists, and you go, wait a second, I thought we were talking about aliens here. But all of the experiencers that talk about coming into contact with non-human intelligence, almost down to the very last person, I've never heard someone say they just had a verbal conversation with an alien. That was just verbal. Almost every single one of those stories is about telepathy.
Yeah.
And just having some kind of telepathic communication. And it seems to be a layer of reality, just like the internet is a layer of our reality that we accept every day. We're on Wi-Fi right now. I'm on Wi-Fi. You're on Wi-Fi. We're having this conversation, and it would seem like magic to someone 150 years ago, but it's very real, and it's very much a part of our day to day. And possibly the mental realm may just represent a form of biological internet that we are able to access. No one's teaching you how to use it.
Right? That's good. Yeah, I mean, for me, my model on reality encompasses nuts and bolts craft, but I still think you can have the woo as well. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. Beings come here in nuts and bolts craft, but they can use their minds and generate weird phenomena. Some humans, like me, for example, generate weird phenomena. I can't control it consciously. It's a subconscious thing. Maybe these aliens know how to do it consciously, and maybe they've had a long time to study how brains work, etc., etc. So for me, my model, it's nuts and bolts, but I embrace the woo aspect as well. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive.
I think
this is like you'll go down, it's interdimensional, they're not physical, and they can flit in and out of the spirit world, and they can contact the dead. I don't buy that at all. You're joining too many dots there for my liking. I stick to nuts and bolts,
But I have to point out,
getting human up.
Well, it's people are going to roast me if I don't call you out on the fact that this whole thing started with a conversation about channeling, right? I mean, like at a certain point, our whole conversation is really resting on that.
Mental environment again. That's one mind being connected to a distant mind,
Yeah.
Non-local, whatever the term is, non-locality consciousness. I can't remember what the term is for it, but it's going back to the power of the mind. So we've gone full circle in a way. Mm-hmm. We're talking about poltergeist and the mental environment, and we start off talking about channeling. That's one mind interfacing with another mind, which isn't local.
I think we can move on to the nuts and bolts in just a second, but just to button this up, in my own experience, the experience I had, I don't talk about it a lot because it's my own personal experience, and it was very personal to me. And it doesn't, I can tell you, a story, but it's just a story. But in my own experience, ayahuasca is the most disgusting thing you can possibly put in your body. It is. I cannot think of something that tastes worse than this. It is the most disgusting thing I've ever tasted. And I drank about, a coffee mug amount of it. And then you lay back on the floor. And I remember very distinctly hearing, and I was in a room with, it was myself and two other people, plus the shaman and his assistant. And my wife was sitting in the corner watching this whole thing. And I heard a woman's voice, not the two people in the room, next to my ear talking to me. And she said, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" And I said, "Yes." And so as this started to take place, it felt like the only way I can describe it is I could open my eyes, I would look around, I would see the room, I would feel the floor beneath my feet, but gradually, slowly, just over a period of maybe it's tough to pin it to a time, but a minute, maybe 3 minutes. It's like someone took a fader knob and just turned the knob down, and the real world just faded away. And I'm in open. You feel like you're in infinite space, and you look around. You can't see the room you're in anymore. You just see infinite space. And I remember having this voice just keep talking to me, and she would ask me questions, and she would say things, and it was a female voice, and it was very strange to experience. And so coming out of it, it gave me this whole different perspective on when you think of somebody and the phone rings and it's them, and what that is. It's like there's almost like the brain is a tuner, and you can tune in to a frequency of reality. And right now we're in this world. And I know Tom DeLonge has mentioned this before with the interdimensional thing, that what if there's a technology of consciousness where they can sort of phase in and out of adjacent realities? I always find that very fascinating. But I very much appreciate your commitment to nuts and bolts, because I think that's what's going to get us to the next step in this conversation. It's actually looking at what we can see and what we can measure.
Start somewhere. Yeah.
I was hoping we could spend a few minutes and just look at the website. And let me see if I can do this. I'm going to do a screen share. Let's see if I can if I can't do it on my end, it might have to come from your end, but let's see here if I can get this to go. Oh, okay. This isn't, it wants me to quit, which is going to bail on our recording if I have to quit and reopen.
Do you want me to do it from my
If you can, let me, oh, wait, hold on. Maybe let's see if this goes. Oh, can you see this?
Yes, that looks familiar. Oh, it's my side.
Hey, look at that. Okay, so badaliens.info, you've gathered together a lot of information in one place. It's very dark. It's very dense. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. And I've noticed that you've updated it recently. Can you talk about some of the new things that you've added to the site, and we can kind of dig into some of these links?
On the human mutilations, that's the last one updated. I mean, I've got a lot of examples on there, and I didn't want to turn it into a gore fest. So what I've done, sorry
to cut you off, but since we're doing this over video, can you just warn me if I'm going to click on a link and YouTube's going to throw me off because it's too dark? Let me know before I click on it, and we'll avoid some of the darker stuff. I know what I'm about to see, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, well, at the bottom of the human mutilations page, I've put a link on to Telegram. Someone sent me a link they've created of other human mutilation cases. So I've got a link there for that. So I do want to put more and more and more pictures of dead bodies on there. I think there's enough examples, to be honest. And, I didn't want to turn it into sort of a gore site too much. I wanted to sort of keep a sort of balance to the website, and not overshadow the other subject areas. But yeah, at the end of that page, there's a Telegram link. So that's one of the more recent amendments I've done. But the cases there, I've tried to sort of put in chronological order.
Okay. Yeah, this whole group.
Dyatlov Pass. Some people still think it's avalanche. I don't.
I mean, I can't imagine how an avalanche would do some of the stuff that's described here. But yeah, this is getting a little dark. So I'll scroll back up.
You don't have to scroll through it if you don't want to. Keep it family friendly.
So let's talk about human mutilations. We've heard about cattle mutilations. Yeah. It's more broadly referred to as animal mutilations because it's not just cattle, right? Can you explain a little bit about that?
All sorts of animals. So sheep, horses, seals were found off the east coast of England in the 1990s with their heads missing. They're all decapitated at the third vertebrae. So there's mammals as well. There's land animals. There's a typical cow. And
Linda Moulton Howe is
but it's also, sorry, go on.
Linda Moulton Howe is for those who are new to this conversation, is probably one of the preeminent early people to leap onto this and research it in depth. Would you say?
Yeah, I think she started back in the 70s. I think. She'd go to the fields literally, and get her hands dirty, as it were. The only thing with Linda is she's done sterling work with animal mutilations, but she has no interest in human mutilations, which I thought she's missing a trick there. But I can't knock her for the work she's done on mutilations. She will it'll stand the test of time. I'm the primary researcher on that one.
So can you just summarize it quickly for people who aren't familiar? What are some of the common things about an animal mutilation? And we can dovetail into the human abduction stuff as well. But what makes them so unique, and why do you say this was aliens and not just another animal out in the wild?
The cuts are very precise. They appear to be done with some sort of laser, according to vets. If they were done by humans, they would be a lot rougher and a lot more cruder. So you've got this sort of precision to a lot of the extractions. Also, they're often bloodless as well. There's no sign of any blood. There's no sign of any predators or human footprints around the animals as well. Mm-hmm. So it's the sort of precision is the main thing, and the lack of blood.
And there's no blood in the animal. It's not like the animal was killed and just the blood stayed inside the animal. Completely drained.
Yeah. I mean, the theory seems to be that they're taken up on board the craft, they're sort of meddled with, and then they're just dropped back down onto the ground rather than being done in situ. But yeah, it's all mainly cattle, but all sorts of animals. There's some photos of cats towards the end that have been literally cut in half. I know of an abductee in the UK. I can't remember if I got the picture on there, but he was going through abductions, and there were 4 mice lined up outside the house. They all have a tiny hole in their head. Sometimes just a hole in the head. Sometimes there's various parts of the bodies that have been removed. So they vary in the mutilation itself.
And it seems to be very. I don't want to say scientific, but very, very methodical, very.
There seems to be some intelligence behind it, yeah, and it's not random what they take, and there's that precision to it as well. It's not some sort of random satanic cult that's chopping up animals in a crude manner.
And sometimes there are cases of an animal being picked up in one location and then discovered miles and miles and miles away days later in a completely drained of all blood, their tongues
there are
removed.
humans as well that bilocate. Yeah, there are humans that are found, they were taken in one state in America and turn up in another state in a totally confused manner.
And some abductees have talked about, it was the Pascagoula case where there was a craft that had like almost I don't know if it was Pascagoula or if it was a different one. Maybe somebody can check me on this, but it was like a mechanical arm, almost like a Dr. Octopus arm coming out of one of these craft, trying to grab someone and bring it into the craft.
That reminds me of the Sergeant Levesque case on the human mutilations page, where a witness saw like a tentacle arm wrap itself around like a serpent around the sergeant. So yeah, there's this. Sometimes you hear of beams of light, other times you hear these tentacle type apparatus being used. Whether that indicates different species, I don't know, that have got different technologies. I don't know, but
so as you point out on your site, that we are aware of animal mutilations. It's mostly thought of as cattle only, but it's not limited to cattle. It extends past that to other animals and humans as well. And that's very, very rarely reported. And only a few people even talk about that. And the ones that I've seen, just from looking at your site, are very cagey about getting too deep into that because of how dark it gets. Can you talk a little bit about what you know?
So the first case that went public was the one in Brazil in 1989 and the Guaraparanga Reservoir. That one, the photos from it were released to the public in 1994, and they appeared in a UK book by Tony Dodd in 1999. But that's the first human mutilation case where we've got a sequence of photos. And we've also got an autopsy report from the doctor as well. So that particular case has probably got more evidence than any other human mutilation case that's currently in the public domain. What happened was that a chap was walking along near a reservoir and he saw a group of vultures. And he thought, that's a bit odd. So he went over to investigate, and then he saw this body on the ground. The eyes were missing, the tongue was missing. There'd been a rectal coring, had these like black marks on the body, and a lot of the inside had been taken out. That's one of the themes you get with human mutilations, the idea of these cookie cutter holes that appear on the limbs or on the torso, on the legs. And they seem to suck out the innards through these holes.
It's really weird. It's like a hole the size of a quarter.
Yeah.
And then there's like no organs inside this body.
Yeah, they suck out all the muscle, organs. There's a case further on from Malta, which took place, I think it was 2007, the southwest side of Malta. This boy was found. He disappeared for several days. Then they found his body, and literally all his organs, including his brain, were missing. How do you explain that? I think there's one theory about organ traffickers, but it was nearly all his organs were missing, And
if it was organ traffickers, wouldn't they have removed them in a medical setting where they could actually preserve them? You wouldn't take them out in the middle of a field someplace. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I think there was so much of his innards were taken out. I think he weighed about 35 pounds.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. He must have lost like at least half his body weight.
So it gets very dark very quick. There was on your site. There's a group. Maybe you can speak about this a little bit of in the UK of veterinarians and experts. I believe some of them were retired police as well. But wasn't there a group that actually formed specifically to investigate this because it was so strange?
There was the Animal Field Pathology Unit was formed in the UK in the 1990s. Yeah, that was the animal, not the human mutilations. Yeah, David Caton was one of the guys heading that. I don't know if it's still in existence anymore, but yeah, one of the cases they looked at was the deaths of these seals on the east coast of England, where they're all found headless. I think that like 10, 20, 30, 40 seals were found. Other parts of the UK as well, I think headless seals have been found as well. And I think there's even been headless dolphins. So again, we're veering away from, cattle ranches in America to seals off the east coast of England. So it shows you how widespread and diverse, the animal mutilation phenomenon is.
And I'm just back on the site here at alien abduction for people who haven't gotten into that part of the rabbit hole yet. I mean, the rabbit hole is just so deep and it keeps going. It just keeps going. But when you start talking about abductions, even the interview I just did with the mod from UFOB, he was like, I don't like to talk about it because it's too scary. It's too scary to even think about. And
it shows that someone could be interested in the subject and they'll still have a comfort zone. They won't go beyond that, But yeah, it is dark. But I just feel wired to talk about it. It doesn't really affect me, to be honest.
I don't. I find it fascinating because I think that's the. It's been said by many in the past that the abduction phenomenon is the UFO phenomenon. They are one in the same. This is the same thing. And trying to separate them is folly. Mm-hmm. You tell me about the alien implants. So we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the show. Abductees oftentimes discover that they have these implants. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah. So implants have been found on X-rays. Someone might say, I've had this weird sensation in my ear or a weird sensation in my leg, and they'll go and see their physician and they'll do an X-ray, and some foreign object might appear. And what researchers like Dr. Roger Lear found when they were looking at implants was there'd be no surface mark from where the implant had gone in. There'd be evidence of nanotechnology when they removed some of these implants. There seemed to be a protective membrane that forms around the implant as well. So there's some commonalities that you notice between these implants. The other thing I noticed as well, a lot of them, no two look exactly the same. They're all slightly different, as if they're maybe wired to the specific person's physiology. So some are like shards of glass. Some of them have bits of wires sticking out. No two seem to be exactly the same. I think Dr. Roger Lear removed about 80 implants over the years. But like I was saying earlier, I don't know if anyone is still doing that line of research, but it's very valuable.
And these are some of the implants here.
Some of them, yeah. But, it adds tangibility to the abduction phenomenon, because people say it's all in the mind, just sleep paralysis. But, when you've got physical objects being taken out of people, one of the odd cases with implants was I can't remember his name, Terry Lovelace. And he had an X-ray of an implant. And when he went back later on to have it removed, the implant had disappeared. So it shows you, these aliens seem to know at times what their subjects are up to. And they obviously didn't want that implant being analysed. And when he went back to have it removed, it was no longer there.
I find this...
You get the other abductees where they don't want the implant removed, like Strebo. Oh, no, I've got something in my ear, but I don't want it taken out. So you have that aspect as well.
It's tough because in this field, you're forced to rely on other people's stories and testimonies a lot, and so then it becomes sort of this, I don't want to say cult of personality, but almost like the conceptual framework that you used on which to build everything else sort of rests on what some people are telling you. So you have to. There are certain people that just sort of others gravitate to, and Whitley Strieber's one of them. Stephen Greer's one, Lou Elizondo. There's different personalities. Mm-hmm. I always found Terry Lovelace's case very captivating, and he wrote. I actually turned around for a second to grab this off my bookshelf, but he wrote this book, Incident at Devil's Den.
Good read.
Terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Terrifying. Goes camping with a friend of his. This is in the 60s when they're in the army together. They decide to go camping at a place known as Devil's Den. Neither of them really had any experience camping. They just kind of went to the library, got a book on he says, we got a book on how to go camping, read it, and then just went down to Walmart and bought some things and went camping. And then had this terrifying encounter where they were taken, and it was very strange what happened afterwards. It's a great story. But I had forgotten about the implant aspect of this. And one of the things I wanted to point out is I find this really interesting, this photo. Some of these look like man-made RFID.
They do, don't they? Yeah, they do look very sort of
like this one on the top right that's copper wire wrapped around some kind of a coil in a glass tube. That's what it looks like to me. And some of these look like they're definitely human made. And I wonder. So Carla Turner, who's on this page down here, this is Carla Turner, for those who don't know. She gave a few talks that you can still find on YouTube if you know how to search. You don't go to this page and just click on her presentation. I think it's actually this one where she talks about there's some confusion about who's doing the abducting. Is it humans, military, they call them MILABs, military abduction cases, or is it alien beings? And then there's some crossover possibility there where it might be people get abducted by non-human intelligence, and then our military comes in behind them and abducts the person again to find out what's going on, to gather almost like intelligence on what's happening with these people. And I find that really interesting because when I look at the picture of these implants, do we know if any of these are still around, or what happened to?
I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, that's something to follow up on. Yeah, I'm not sure who now owns all those implants. Whether Roger Lear owned them and then he died and they were passed on to his family, I don't know, or to research associates. That's a good question. I'm not sure the answer to that one. But going back to the MyLab thing, the problem is these aliens can create virtual reality scenarios, and when you're recounting your experience, you could say, I saw 10-foot blonde Nordics, I saw men in army fatigues. It's very difficult to know what was actually going on and what's being created by aliens. Aliens may want people to think that it's humans doing the abductions, not themselves. So they might create scenarios in people's minds that it's the army doing it, and then these people then recount that story, and the MyLab industry expands and grows.
Do you recall if Terry Lovelace mentioned seeing humans on board the craft that he was taken on board? That's commonly reported, that they will see different beings, and then
I can't remember, to be honest with you. I can't remember.
He's given some presentations, and he goes into detail about some of these experiences, and others have mentioned it. I think Jim Sparks was one. There are the most famous one is. What's his name? He was the on the Lumberjack team. He's the one that was on Joe Rogan. They made the movie Fire in the Sky. I'm blanking on his name right now, and he's like one of the most famous abduction cases. But anyway, he said that he was on the craft. He freaked out, panicked, tried to hit one of these beings. They left the room, and then he was able to get up and walk around the craft and actually left the room he was in, went down a hallway, came into another room, and then there were like Travis Walton. There were 3 or 4 humans standing in front of him in the room, and they were just like regular people. And he, I think it was on Joe Rogan, said that he thinks that was a mental projection, that they knew he was panicking, they knew he was freaking out, so they basically just gave him that.
Yeah. I mean,
and going a little deeper. Oh, go ahead.
I'd say there could be some cases where there could be actual humans on board, but they could be some sort of hybrid or humans that have been abducted that are brainwashed, So could be several possible scenarios for people who report humans on board craft. Some could be actual humans.
Jim Sparks
said,
Jim Sparks, in his presentations and in his book, which is actually here, called The Keepers. This is Jim Sparks' book. He actually passed away just a little while ago, a few years ago. But he talked about being on board a craft, and he later met another abductee who was also on the craft with him, and they recognized each other, and they got together, and compared notes. And how freakish that was that happened, and that's been reported a lot. David Jacobs talks about that a lot too.
Yeah. That's nice corroboration when you can do that, and it's also cathartic for the individual that they found someone else who they can share who've had the shared experience. So yeah, that's pretty good.
The whole phenomenon is very strange, and it's difficult for me to believe that these people are just making this up for fame and fortune, because it completely destroys their careers. It makes them an outcast in society. They are made fun of. If you go back and watch the Oprah Winfrey episodes where John Mack would go on with abductees, she ridicules them in front of a room full of people. And is acting very glib about the whole thing. And you see these are grown adults who are at the verge of tears in front of this audience. And they're like, this is what happened to me. At least this is what I believe happened to me.
Mm.
And to have a room full of people laugh and sort of joke about it, like, couldn't possibly be that. I can't see any reason for someone to try and fabricate a story like that.
No, I agree. Yeah, definitely.
So when we talk about, just going back to the site for a second, alien bases, some of these other links, I just want to give people a taste of what they can expect when they look at some of these other links here. Can you talk a little bit about alien bases? Because here we have a picture of Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, Pat Price and Kit Green.
Yeah.
These are not nobodies.
Yeah. So the link, alien bases and these guys here, is that you had Project Stargate, which was funded by the CIA, a remote viewing program. And during the course of their remote views, one of them came across alien bases on Earth, and I list the locations. Some are within mountains. And then I go on to talk about remote views which have taken place on the moon, and there's alien bases on there. If you've got aliens on Earth, they've probably got some sort of compounds on other planets in our solar system. People tend to think it's the far side of the moon. So yeah, there's a correlation between, you get into remote viewing and it's interesting, and then you realise that an element of remote viewing is to do with alien bases, and then bang, I'm automatically into the alien base side of remote viewing. You know what I mean? That's an interview with veteran researcher Timothy Gurd. He's talking about alien bases, what he was told by people in the know. But again, that's another comfort zone thing. Some people think aliens are coming here, but if you mention bases, they might laugh in your face, you know. But to me, again, it's not a great leap of faith. If they're coming here, they're probably going to build establishments to work from, to build further craft, to take back their human and animal specimens. So I thought the bases chapter actually came much later on, but I thought it sort of tied in with the other chapters, as it's quite a key aspect or sub-subject within ufology.
It does make sense. You know, if you were coming here from somewhere else, you'd want to have some resources nearby to help support your operations here. Clearly, they're doing something. They're not just coming from across the galaxy and then leaving.
Yeah. So this is the conclusion where I'm talking about Pat Price and Grush. And then I go into the Atlas of Humanity, and there's lots of in-depth text there about what the aliens are doing here, the hybrid program, influencing leaders in power, getting the public to lose interest in their government, so they'll look towards an outside force to come in and help us. That sort of thing. There's some links to some of Marshall V. and Summers' work as well. We're getting into realms of spirituality and meditation, that sort of thing. So superficially, my site's quite sort of, you could say it's a little bit tabloid, but then the conclusion does get a bit deep and a bit metaphysical.
Well, I think it's a big subject, and it's a deep subject, and it's very weird, and it appears to be more and more real the further along we get in investigating it. There's just more there. We've gone from a place where 20, 30 years ago, you could literally lose your job for talking about this openly, and people thought you were crazy. If you were an airline pilot and you reported a UFO, you would get sent for a psychological evaluation. That is no longer the case. That's been changed now. We have legislation on the books in the United States now that addresses non-human intelligence. That's official. That's real. That really happened. We have what is Ryan Graves' organization for aviation safety that's pushing for this. My own uncle is a captain for United and flies all over the world. And so you have eyes in the air that are seeing this stuff.
Yeah.
And now we're at a point in the conversation where the further along we go, the weirder it gets. You know, you have Navy fighter pilots describing craft that they see every single day, all the time. So it's
got to become a tipping point where you've got so much data and so many people in positions of responsibility and ability coming forward that, you know, the general public hopefully will push it onto the into a platform where, it becomes sort of as interesting as what the Kardashians are doing,
I think that's where I'm at. I mean, that's what really motivated me to stick with this channel and keep doing interviews and talk to people like you and others and who have something to say on the matter, because I think that we have to get past this, like, it can't be real. And we have to get into, it's real. Now, what do we do? How do we conduct ourselves? What should we be thinking about? As you sit at work at a regular job and you're trying to reconcile like this fantastical story of what's probably going on all around you with your day-to-day reality. At some point you have to just make the leap, and you just have to say, okay, well, it's happening. So what does that mean? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for our society? What could that mean? And I think that's the most fascinating part of this whole conversation, is where we go from here. Do you have any thoughts on 2024 and what you've seen so far? Anything that you are looking forward to or expect to see or would like to see?
Last year, the excitement curve was like this. You had Grush going public, the Schumer amendment, Grush testified before Congress, and then things dipped when the Schumer amendment got amended again and watered down. I think I'm waiting now for these 30, 40 whistleblowers to come forward like the rest of us. Lou Elizondo's book. I'm looking forward to that. I don't know if it's going to have any more detail in it than what he said verbally. So yeah, I think we need more momentum now, because we've lost a bit of way. We've had these guerrilla Wikipedia rewriters rewriting people's data on Wikipedia. That's another bit of negative news. So I'm hoping for the whistleblowers to come forward and give, stand alongside Grush and say their stuff.
I think that the Wikipedia scandal, which for those who don't know, that revolved around Ross Coulthart, and there was a group of people going onto Wikipedia, removing a lot of information about his journalistic career and background that proved that make him so credible as a reporter and as a journalist. And we also had the pushback you mentioned about the Schumer amendment, where they took out sort of the two key provisions in that amendment, which were eminent domain, allowing the United States government to exercise control over this technology. Chris Mellon talks about that in the presentation he gives, where he says, if this technology exists somewhere, then it belongs to the American people because we paid to recover it. So if a disk goes down and the military recovers it, it belongs to the American people. And this is coming from Chris Mellon. And then the other provision was subpoena power to go after the witnesses and basically say, oh, let's just call the board of directors for Lockheed Martin in front of a congressional committee and let's ask them under oath what's going on. They would know, right? So that to me is just more smoke indicating that this fire is getting bigger and it's kind of burning out of control at this point. If they're pushing back that hard, we must be very close.
Yeah, there's a push and pull going on, definitely, between people that want the truth out and people that don't. And we're seeing different forms of opposition, as you've just pointed out.
Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me again today. I know the audience is going to love this. They love the site, and the last interview we did got rave reviews, so hopefully this one will as well. I will talk to you again in the future, I'm sure. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll hook up when this thing's ready to go.
All right. Thank you, Clint.
All right, man.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.